The 38th floor of the Harwick Financial Group smelled like ambition and expensive cologne, and neither of those things had ever belonged to Odalys Breem. She knew that. She had always known that. The knowing didn't make it easier to walk through those glass doors every morning with her laptop bag digging into her shoulder and her ID badge already half-twisted backward on its lanyard. But she did it anyway, because Odalys Breem was not the kind of woman who quit. She was, however, apparently the kind of woman you could say anything to in the middle of a crowded conference room. And no one would so much as look up from their phones. "That quarterly variance report," said Priscilla Wendell, dropping a folder on the table without looking at Odalys, "is embarrassing. I don't know what they teach at state schools, but reading a balance sheet apparently wasn't on the syllabus." Laughter from the end of the table. Not loud. The polite kind, which was somehow worse. Odalys picked up the folder. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that the variance report was not wrong. It was the most accurate forensic breakdown of departmental overspend that Harwick Financial had seen in 4 years, and she had checked it 3 times. What she said instead was nothing, because she had learned, in the 2 years since joining this firm, that saying nothing was the only armor that didn't get used against you later. Priscilla was already walking away. Her heels clicked in perfect rhythm across the marble floor, and the 2 analysts who followed her everywhere matched her pace without being asked. "Don't take it personally," said a voice behind Odalys. It was Derek Cho, from Risk Compliance, and he meant well in the vague, harmless way that people who never do anything useful tend to mean well. "She's like that with everyone." "She's not," Odalys said. Derek didn't have an answer for that, so he went and got himself more coffee. The thing about Harwick Financial Group was that it operated in the exact narrow space between $1 billion in managed assets. Miss Starston, 17 offices across North America, and somewhere inside its elegant marble and glass architecture, someone had been moving money in ways that made Odalys's chest tighten every time she ran the numbers. She had found it 4 months ago, a pattern of microtransfers, each one small enough to slip beneath the automatic flagging threshold, each one timed exactly 14 minutes apart. Not random, not error, pattern. Someone who knew the system had written it into the system, and the money was flowing somewhere it had absolutely no business going. She had not told anyone. This was either the smartest or the most dangerous decision Odalys Breem had ever made, and some mornings she genuinely could not tell which. Rafe Soldano arrived on a Tuesday, which was not a day that usually held any significance at Harwick Financial. He came with 2 men who did not speak, and a meeting invitation that had appeared on the CEO's calendar without explanation. And by 11 in the morning, the entire 38th floor knew that something was happening in the executive suite. Odalys found out the same way she found out everything, not from the gossip, but from the numbers. The compliance hold that appeared on 3 subsidiary accounts at 9:47, the wire transfer suspension logged at 10:15, the pattern of freezes that moved methodically through every account that intersected with a particular cluster of shell entities she had been quietly mapping for months. She sat at her desk and stared at her screen and understood, with the specific clarity that only comes from having spent too many sleepless nights, looking at the same data, exactly what was happening. Someone else had found the same thread she'd been pulling, and they had far more power to pull it. She was still staring at her screen when the call came from the front desk, asking her to come to Conference Room B. Conference Room B was the one with the good chairs and the real coffee and the view of the lake, which meant this was not a meeting Harwick Financial wanted anyone to see happening. Odalys straightened her blazer, the navy one, the one that fit right, the one she'd bought because her mother had told her that if you couldn't control what people thought of you, you could at least control what you showed them. And she walked down the hall with her laptop tucked under her arm. Rafe Soldano was standing at the window when she came in. He did not turn around immediately. He was looking at the city the way men who own things look at them, not with admiration, but with the calm assessment of someone calculating what it's worth. Then he turned, and Odalys understood immediately why the entire floor had gone quiet. He was not what people meant when they said dangerous. He was too contained for that. The danger was in the stillness, in the way his eyes went to her laptop before her face, registered something, and then moved to her face with the unhurried focus of a man who had already decided she was interesting. "Miss Breem," he said. His voice was low, not soft. There was a difference. "Sit down." "I'd rather stand," Odalys said, because she had learned that the only thing worse than walking into a room at a disadvantage was sitting down in one. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the acknowledgement that she had done something he hadn't expected. "All right," he said. "Tell me about the variance reports." "Which ones?" "The ones that aren't in the system." The silence in that room was the kind that had weight to it. Odalys had kept copies. Of course she had kept copies. She had kept copies on an encrypted drive she carried everywhere, and she had told no one, and she had spent 4 months wondering what she was going to do with them. And now a man she had never met was standing in conference room B, telling her he already knew they existed. "I don't know what you're referring to," she said. Rafe Soldano tilted his head slightly. "Mrs. Breem, I'm going to be direct with you, because I think you're a person who prefers that." He pulled out a chair and sat down, and the shift in posture somehow made him more, not less, commanding. "I've been watching the same pattern you've been watching for 8 months. The difference is, I know who built it, I know who's been benefiting from it. And I need to know how far into Harwick's internal systems it goes. Your reports suggest you've mapped something I haven't been able to map from the outside. Why are you telling me this? Because you haven't reported it to anyone at this firm," he said. "And that suggests you're either involved, or you're smart enough to know that someone here can't be trusted, and you're trying to figure out which one." "I already know which one," he said. "I'm telling you so you know that I know." The coffee sat between them on the table, untouched by both. "Who are you?" Odalys said. "The name of my organization isn't important right now." He leaned forward slightly. "What's important is that you have something I need, and I have something you need, which is a way out of this building before Harwick's CFO figures out that you've been running shadow audits on accounts he personally manages." The floor felt slightly less solid beneath Odalys's feet. "How long?" she said carefully, "until he figures that out?" Rafe looked at his watch. It was an ordinary watch, no brand markings she could see, worn on the inside of his wrist. "I'd estimate hold I placed this morning flagged 3 of his accounts. He'll be cross-referencing access logs by noon." Odalys thought about her desk, her extra pair of shoes under it, the 3 plants she'd been keeping alive for 2 years, the framed photo of her niece that she'd been meaning to hang but had never gotten around to. "I need my drive," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll walk you back." She had expected chaos. What she got instead was the peculiar quiet of a building where the people who understood what was happening were too professional to show it, and the people who didn't understand were too absorbed in their own mornings to notice. Priscilla Wendell passed them in the hallway and looked directly through Odalys the way she always did, which, for reasons Odalys could not entirely explain, felt in that moment like a small gift. The drive was where she'd left it, in the locked drawer of her desk, inside a padded envelope that looked exactly like the kind of thing an unremarkable forensic auditor would use to mail documents. She took it. She took the photo of her niece. She left the shoes and the plants. In the elevator going down, Rafe Soldano stood beside her and did not speak, and she did not speak, and the elevator played a soft version of something she couldn't identify, and Odalys thought, "This is the part where I should be afraid." And she was, underneath. The fear was there, a low hum beneath everything else. But above it was something else, something that had been absent from her chest for a very long time. Purpose. She had found something real. Someone else could see it. And the particular loneliness of being the only person in the room who knew what was actually happening had, without announcement, ended. His offices were not what she'd expected. She had expected glass and steel, something that announced itself. What she got was the fourth floor of a converted building in the West Loop. Exposed brick, good lighting, people moving through hallways with the focused quiet of a place where the work was serious. No logos on the walls, no receptionist who greeted visitors with a smile calibrated to say nothing. "What is this?" she said, which she already knew was not a specific enough question, but she needed a second to recalibrate. "A private financial intelligence operation," Rafe said, taking her coat without asking and hanging it on a hook by the door with the ease of someone who had done it 100 times. "We track money. Specifically, the kind of money that moves in ways that finance people aren't supposed to understand unless they built the system or found it by accident. You didn't find it by accident." "No," she agreed. "I didn't." He showed her to a workspace, clean desk, 2 monitors already set up, a chair that was the right height, which told her someone had estimated correctly that she was not 6 feet tall. She sat down and opened her laptop and plugged in the drive, and for a moment she just looked at the data she had been carrying by herself for 4 months. "Walk me through it," he said, from the doorway. So she did. She talked for 40 minutes without stopping, which was longer than she had spoken consecutively in any professional setting in 2 years, because at Harwick Financial there had never been anyone who asked her to continue when she paused. Rafe Soldano did not ask her to slow down. He did not ask her to simplify. He asked questions that told her he understood what she was saying, and twice he pulled his phone out and made a call in a low voice while she kept going, like a conductor adjusting something in the orchestra without stopping the music. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The entity routing through the Cayman subsidiary," he said. "You said it's been active for 6 years. At least. Possibly 8. The older records are less clean. It's Vordman Group." The name landed in the room like something physical. Odalys had heard of Vordman Group the way you hear of things you're not supposed to know about, in the margins of other conversations, in footnotes of regulatory documents that got quietly amended, in the way that certain people, at certain firms, went suddenly quiet when the subject got close. It was not a mafia. It was something that had outgrown that word. It was an organization that had found the seam between what law enforcement could prove and what was technically legal, and had been living in that seam for 3 decades. And Harwick Financial is a laundry, he said simply. A very elegant, very well-regarded laundry. She thought about Priscilla Wendell and her calibrated contempt. She thought about the CEO's quarterly addresses about integrity and fiduciary responsibility. She thought about 2 years of being told her reports were embarrassing. "How much of it?" she said. "Have you been able to prove before today? 60%? Maybe 65? And now," he looked at her, 92, conservatively. Odalys turned back to her screen. She had a feeling she was not going to leave this building for a very long time, and the feeling was not distress. It was something much closer to relief. What followed was 11 days that Odalys would later struggle to describe in order, because time inside that building did not move the way time normally moved. It compressed around the work and expanded in the spaces between, and the spaces between were stranger than the work. The team was small. 4 other analysts, a woman named Bev who handled encrypted communications and spoke approximately 15 words total across 11 days, and a former federal prosecutor named Oswald Trent, who chain-drank sparkling water and argued with Rafe about everything except, apparently, the work itself. Odalys fit into the team the way she had never fit anywhere professionally, which was to say, exactly. Not because they were kind. They were not particularly kind. They were focused in the way that people who have been at something too long and too hard become focused, which left little room for the ordinary social lubricant of office life. But they listened to her. When she identified something, they looked at it. When she said she thought the routing structure had a second layer they hadn't mapped, no one told her she was wrong without checking first. And when she was right, which she was, about the second layer, and about the timing mechanism beneath it, and about the real-time account that was still actively now receiving transfers as they sat in that room. Rafe looked at her across the table with an expression she didn't know how to categorize. It was not surprise. It was something more specific than that. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone seeing a thing clearly for the first time that they had been told by the world was not worth looking at. On the fourth day, he brought her coffee. Not from the communal machine down the hall, from somewhere that made it correctly, in a paper cup with no sleeve, because she always took the sleeve off, which she had done once took the sleeve off, and apparently he had noticed. He said. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I don't sleep much, she said. I've heard you pacing. He was quiet for a second. You can hear that. The acoustics in this building are not great. He sat down across from her, which was unusual, never settled. Tell me about the Harwick variance reports. The ones you ran before you found the pattern. Which ones specifically? The ones you didn't submit. She looked at him. There were 11 of them. I know. I pulled your submission history. Then you already know what's in them. I know the numbers, he said. I want to know what you thought when you ran them. No one had ever asked her that. Not once. In 2 years. What she thought, she told him. She told him about the first time she'd seen the accounts not balance in a way that felt intentional rather than accidental. About the particular quality of a number that's been massaged versus a number that's been moved. About the night at 11:45 when she had understood. Not suspected, understood, that someone had built a trap inside the firm's own balance sheets and had been collecting from it for years without anyone noticing. I noticed, she said at the end. You noticed, he agreed. The way he said it was not patronizing, it was not the oh how impressive of someone who expected less. It was a simple acknowledgement, the same tone he used when Bev confirmed a decryption or Oswald Trent identified a jurisdictional angle. Matter of fact, accurate, real. Odalys went back to her screen and tried not to think about how much she had needed someone to say that, and how long she had been waiting without knowing she was waiting. The problem arrived in the form of a man named Harwell Kite. Odalys had not heard of Harwell Kite before the 9th day, when his name appeared in a set of corporate filings she had been cross-referencing against Vordman Group's subsidiary structure. But the reaction in the room when she said the name told her everything she needed to know about what it meant. Bev stopped typing. Oswald Trent set down his sparkling water. Rafe, who had been standing by the window on a call, ended the call without saying goodbye. Where? He said. Odalys turned her monitor toward him. That's, Oswald Trent started, and then stopped, and then said, That's not good. He's not a shareholder, Odalys said. He's not on any board. He's not in any document by name, but every subsidiary that routes to Vordman touches at least one entity that can be traced, through at least 2 intermediaries, to a holding company that belongs to him. She had been staring at this for 3 hours, and her voice was completely level. Because the thing about staring at something terrifying long enough is that eventually you become accustomed to its shape. He's not in the system. He is the system. Rafe was reading her screen. He read it twice, slowly, and she could see him building the same architecture she had built, layering the same connections, arriving at the same place. If we submit this to the federal filing, he said, it will take 18 months to untangle, and he will know within 48 hours that someone has filed. Yes, Odalys said, which means anyone associated with the filing. Yes, she said again. He straightened up. He looked at her with that direct, specific attention she had come to recognize over 11 days as the way he looked at something when he was deciding what to do about it, and she held it without flinching because she had been thinking about this for 3 hours, and she had an answer. There's another way, she said. Tell me. We don't file, we move. She pulled up a second window, one she'd been building quietly while the rest of the team worked the federal angle. Vordman's entire operational structure depends on 6 key accounts that nobody knows are key because they don't look like anything. They look like a consulting firm's operating expenses. They look like payroll. They look like nothing. She pointed to the screen. Those 6 accounts are the spine. If we collapse them simultaneously, in real time, the whole structure above them loses its foundation. We don't give him 48 hours. We give him 6 minutes. The room would do that, Rafe said. It was not a question, quite. I can do that, Odalys said. I've been doing it in simulation for 3 days. Something passed across his face that she did not have a word for yet, though she would later. Then do it, he said. Right now. Do it now. She turned back to her screen. She had spent 2 years being told her reports were embarrassing. She had spent 2 years walking through glass doors every morning in a building where she was invisible to the people who mattered, and visible only to the ones who wanted to use her invisibility as an insult. She had spent 2 years knowing something was wrong and having no one look at her long enough to see that she knew. Her fingers were steady on the keyboard. "Give me 20 minutes," she said. She did it in 17. The accounts did not collapse dramatically. There was no alarm, no flashing screen, no cinematic moment of systems going down. What happened was quieter and more complete than that. 6 accounts suspended simultaneously, their transaction authority revoked at the root level, their access keys cycled to credentials that existed for 11 seconds and then didn't. The money stopped moving. The spine of a 3-decade operation went still in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, and no one outside that room knew it had happened for exactly 4 hours. By the time Harwell Kite's people understood what had occurred, the documentation was already in 4 separate federal repositories, time-stamped and verified, filed through channels that Rafe's organization had spent 8 months establishing specifically for this moment. Odalys sat back in her chair. Her hands were shaking slightly, which she had not expected. Not from fear. From the specific adrenaline of a thing completed, the way a sprinter's legs shake at the finish line, not because the race was too hard, but because the body does not immediately know it's allowed to stop. Rafe came and stood beside her. Not behind her, beside her. That, he said, looking at her screen, is the most precise financial operation I have ever seen executed in real time by a single person. Odalys looked at the screen. It's not complicated if you understand the structure. A lot of people who understood the structure have tried to find this for 3 years, he said. You found it in 4 months, alone, without resources, and you just collapsed it in 17 minutes. She didn't say anything. Odalys, he said, and the way he said her name was different from the way he had been saying it for 11 days, and she noticed, and she did not look at him yet. The CFO at Harwick, she said. He's going to be in a federal building in about 6 hours, Rafe said. He's not going to have the bandwidth to be angry at you. And Priscilla Wendell? A pause. What about her? She told everyone my reports were embarrassing. Her boss's boss is going to federal intake tonight, he said. I think you can consider that addressed. It was not justice exactly. It was not the specific, satisfying scene Odalys had sometimes imagined, the one where she walked back into that conference room and laid the evidence on the table and watched every person who had laughed understand what they'd been laughing at. But it was something. It was the world correcting itself, slowly and without ceremony, the way the world actually does, when the right information finally reaches the right place. She allowed herself, quietly, to feel it. 3 weeks later, Odalys was still in the West Loop building. This had happened without either of them making a decision about it, which was the way most things happened between her and Rafe Soldano. Not announced, not negotiated, just gradually undeniable. She had a desk. A real one, not the temporary workspace she'd been given on day 1. Bev had given her a plant, which Bev had described as low maintenance, and which Odalys had immediately identified as a variety that required more attention than that. But she was keep it alive. So on a Tuesday afternoon, it was a Tuesday again, she noted, which seemed to be when things happened, Rafe came and sat across from her, which he did sometimes now, in the spaces between work. I want to show you something, he said. He put a file on her desk. She opened it and read the first page and then looked up at him. This is an offer, she said. Yes, to be on staff. Permanently, yes. She looked back at the file. The title on the paper, Intelligence Analysis. She read it twice to make sure she was reading it correctly. You don't have to answer now, he said. Who had this title before? Nobody, he said. We created it. She looked at him. He looked back. There was between them the particular weight of 11 days of working at the edge of something real together, of coffee brought correctly without asking, of her name said a specific way at a specific moment. I have conditions, she said. I assumed, he said. I want to see the full organizational structure, not what you showed me the first day, the real one. Done. I want approval authority on any external filing that uses data I produce. Done. And I want a better chair, she said. This one is wrong for the desk height. Something happened in his expression. Not the not-quit smile from day one, but the actual thing, the real thing, quiet and entirely focused on her. I'll have a new one here by tomorrow morning. Odalys closed the file. She looked at the plant Bev had given her, which was in fact thriving under her attention. She thought about the 38th floor of Harwick Financial Group and the conference room and the navy blazer and the file folder dropped without eye contact and the laughter, polite and precisely calibrated, that had followed. She thought about how small that building felt now. All right, Bis, she said. I accept. Rafe nodded once. He started to stand. Rafe, she said. He stopped. The Eastern Seaboard accounts you mentioned on day 3, she said. The ones you had a clean trace. Yes, they don't, she said. I've been meaning to tell you. He sat back down, and Odalys Breem, who had once been invisible in a building full of people looking directly at her, opened her laptop and began to show him everything she'd found.